There's a lot of resources out there teaching you Spanish for healthcare, but that can so quickly become overwhelming when we try to learn words and phrases to say to our patients. Sure, we may be able to memorize them for a moment, but how do I apply it to what my patient is saying? How do I follow up with my patient? Or what if my patient doesn't follow the script that I'm learning from this book or from this video? Everything you've probably learned has taught you elements of Spanish, but hasn't given you an approach to start to internalize the language. And that's what I'm here for. If you're a physical therapist, occupational therapist, or just work in healthcare and have wanted to start using Spanish with your Spanish-speaking patients, but you weren't really sure how to go about doing that, then I encourage you to hang around. I'm Josh. I'm a former Spanish teacher, now a physical therapist assistant, and I created a continuing education course designed specifically for PTs and OTs with little to no Spanish speaking experience. What I did with this course, what makes it different from other approaches, is I designed it in a way that helps to internalize the language, so that rather than repeating memorized phrases that make sense to your patients, but not really to you, you can create your own original Spanish sentences that make sense both to you and your patient, even if your Spanish isn't perfect. And the best part with this is I designed this course for beginners. So if Spanish has been that school subject that you just didn't understand well, and you want to be able to start speaking more directly with your Spanish-speaking patients, then let's talk. I think for a lot of us, we get immediately intimidated by foreign languages. For many of us, we may start very interested in the idea of learning a foreign language, only to have that flame quickly extinguished when we begin to learn the language. I think often learning a foreign language feels like it's designed for one type of student, and those that naturally gravitate towards that style of teaching and learning, they do well. And the rest of us fumble our way through the course, just trying to understand enough so that we get a passing grade. Language learning can feel so precise, like a science, that we can lose the creative human component to what it is, a language art. Language both have rules that need to be respected and followed, but it also requires experimentation, learning experience, repetition, and the space to apply the language and to make mistakes. It needs to be personalized. We learned our own language through a process of trial and error, and our ability to speak English came from having the opportunity to listen and mimic what our parents and others around us said, learning from their feedback and learning to model our way of speaking from them. Traditionally, using a foreign language focuses so much on having correct grammar and using the exact vocabulary words taught. And if you don't follow the prescribed way that you were taught, you receive negative reinforcement and you get a wrong answer. However, language is more dynamic than that, and it isn't just as simple as right or wrong. And so yes, of course our goal is to be as accurate as we can be when using a second language, but mistakes are inevitably going to happen. The ability to recognize that you've made a mistake and you know how to correct that mistake, that's the real world skill we need to learn and to apply. So from 2008 until 2011, I lived in Spain with all of my communication happening primarily in Spanish. I made lots of mistakes. And you know what? When Spanish people would communicate with me in English, they would make lots of mistakes in English. And yet we were able to consistently work together, grow friendships together, and communicate regularly, even if neither of us were speaking error-free in our second languages. So that grade of a B or C that you may have gotten in Spanish, that isn't a communication barrier with others. You weren't taught that errors and mistakes are inevitable when speaking a foreign language and are even okay. The issue comes from the context in which you're using the foreign language and how you learn from those mistakes. If I could boil it down to something simple, the focus should be on avoiding being wrong rather than perfection. So in other words, if you're trying to greet someone, it's okay to say hola, ¿qué tal? Hola, ¿cómo estás? Buenos días, buenas noches. But you'd want to avoid saying adiós, hasta luego, nos vemos. If you greet someone at 4:30 in the afternoon and say buenos días, well, that's not going to be exactly right, but it's not wrong either. Buenas tardes would be the better choice, but buenos días still expresses the idea of a friendly greeting. Hasta luego, however, expresses a cordial goodbye, and that would be wrong. And that's more of the principle we'll be following, because we're not training ourselves to become interpreters. We're training ourselves to become effective communicators in a foreign language. And that involves being able to get across the message that we want to give, even if it's not exactly the way we would say it in English. Language learning is a continuous process, and you don't have to be good at the language to start using it. You just have to start using it. The question, of course, is how, and that's where I come in, to guide you into that process. So how can I help you? Well, I'm a PTA, and I work both in the acute care setting and the rehab setting. Prior to this, I was a language teacher, and I taught Spanish in the United States for 5 years, and prior to that, I taught English in Spain. After working as a PTA for a number of years, in 2019, I decided to combine both of my fields of study, and I created a Spanish course designed specifically for those who work in PT and OT. I taught this course to PTs and OTs as a continuing education class and had very good success with it. And now, after having offered this course in person a number of times, I decided to adapt it to an online format. And these lessons on this channel are a modified version of that course. So, what makes these lessons different, and how can I help you as someone who works in therapy? Well, for one, these lessons are designed in a way that allows therapists to begin speaking Spanish directly to their patients, even if they only have a limited experience in Spanish. These lessons are focused specifically on words and phrases related directly to PT and OT. So, no worries that you'll be learning unrelated phrases like, the red bird reads books in the library.
Pero si quieres saber, el pájaro rojo lee libros en la biblioteca.
Second, because we're working in a therapy setting, we have the advantage of knowing the routine ahead of time that we'll do with our patients. We can use that preparation time and routine to allow us to prepare ahead of time and to focus on words, phrases, and verbs that we are likely to use with our patients. As a result of this repetition, this naturally helps us to much more quickly internalize the Spanish we are using. And from there, we can begin a foundation of Spanish that we can build off of. Third, as PTs and OTs, our profession provides us with training and skills that we can apply to improve our communication with speakers of other languages. So as we go through these lessons, I will help to highlight how the training that we learned in school can be applied to improve our communication when the patient and the therapist don't speak the same languages. And finally, I will provide you with tips and strategies to teach you how to prepare for therapy with a patient prior to seeing him or her. So in these lessons, you will gain the benefit of learning specific words, phrases, and Spanish grammar rules, as well as learn the skills to problem solve and to create your own original Spanish sentences so that you can speak to each patient's specific need. Through this, you will be able to maximize your ability to communicate in Spanish, even if you feel that your Spanish is limited. As PTs and OTs, we find ourselves working with patients each with their own unique personality and their own unique needs for recovery. And it can almost seem overwhelming to think of the endless topics that we may need to speak about in Spanish. The great thing about these lessons is that they're designed to give you the basics, to help you start speaking Spanish now with your patients. These aren't lessons teaching you how to become an interpreter, but rather these are lessons to teach you how to begin to bridge that language gap so that you can decrease your need for an interpreter and increase that direct PT-OT patient communication. While of course these lessons will provide you with common phrases for various situations, what's most important about these lessons is that they will teach you how to go beyond that and to create your own original, simple sentences to express need, to give direction, or to provide education to your patients. These lessons are designed specifically for anyone who may have described themselves, or maybe still does describe themselves, as a bad Spanish student. And as a former bad Spanish student myself, I very much understand the struggle. So if you consider yourself a beginner and you want to see how you can improve your Spanish within your PT or OT work context, then I encourage you to hang around. These lessons are designed for you. So let's learn some clinical Spanish and let's get talking. I'll see you in the first lesson.